Hi everyone, Michael Elliott here. I'm Between Two Mammoths. I'm here today in the Science Center with Catherine Sanderson, Polar Family Professor of Psychology. Catherine, thanks so much for being here with us on Between Two Mammoths.
I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, let's start with the classroom. You have been teaching here since '97. I want to ask you the question that I get, which is, how have things changed and how are they the same? Like, how do you think about the mix of continuity and change in the Amherst student experience?
The physical students who are in my class are different. That when I started teaching here in '97, it was a lot of kids who'd come from pretty famous prep schools, boarding schools, private schools, often in the sort of Northeast. There were some exceptions, but that was more of the bulk of students in my classes. And I now teach a broader range of students. Probably about 10 years ago, I started regularly seeing students who were transfers, often transfers from community colleges, students who are returning to school sometimes after having served in the military. So the breadth of the student body, in terms of my experience, is different from when I first started.
Well, and you really teach a lot of students because you teach Intro to Psych regularly. So do you have a sense, are students learning differently? Are they approaching their academic experiences differently?
Students now, I think, are really interested in how does this relate to me? And that's actually changed how I teach. So in Intro Psych, also in my social psych class, I start every class with a real world example. And often that real world example will be something that was pulled from the news a week ago, 2 weeks ago. In social psych last fall, we talked about interpersonal attraction and close relationships. And I started with a picture of the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce engagement. And I was like, okay, why do we think this couple, found each other? And of course, they have lots of thoughts about that. Probably more, they've thought about it much more than they've thought about psychology. They've probably thought about that more than I've thought about it. But it's a way of sort of helping them understand why the material, the theory, the research that we're going to be talking about for the next 75 minutes relates to something they actually care about and have thought about.
You and I first met, I don't know if you remember this, when I first arrived at Amherst as president, because you were delivering the DeMott lecture on your book, The Positive Shift, which is another great book of yours that really does translate all this research on mindset and positive thinking into really practical things that we can all do. As I'm thinking about this, I'm imagining we're at the season where a lot of incoming students might be watching on our media feed. Can you distill one or two things from that you think are really valuable for a new college student to think about?
The three things that are most consistent in the literature are: one, spending time in nature. And that's something that's so simple and so important and so doable, because it doesn't mean you have to go to Alaska or you have to hike. It can mean taking a walk outside. It can be being mindful about doing that. And of course, this is a beautiful campus in which there's so many different ways to do that. And so that's one. Two, giving. And I love all of the research on giving, because what it shows is that donating to charity makes us feel happier. Doing a random act of kindness for a stranger makes us happier. Paying a compliment to somebody, giving a small gift. They're tiny little ways in which we can give to other people that we underestimate how meaningful they feel. And then three, and I say this one last because it's the most important, and it's also something we've talked about already, and that is relationships. That the single best predictor of your happiness and frankly also your health is your relationships. I think for all students coming in to college, but also in other life transitions, investing time, energy, and effort in friendships and romantic relationships, in relationships with your parents, with your siblings, with your dorm mates, et cetera, is so important.
Maybe a last question. Can you share, one secret to being a great teacher, that one thing that you would give advice to a new teacher, because you are a master teacher, as generations of Amherst College students
know. That is kind of you to say. And what I will say that I have learned, this is perhaps unexpected, is that it's much easier to teach something that you don't care about that they care about than vice versa. And I'll give a specific example. I teach a class in sports psychology, class that's very popular, lots of students, we have a lot of athletes, a lot of, people who play at Amherst, but lots of people who also train for the Boston Marathon or, play pickleball or, whatever, play recreationally. And what I'll say is that I am super non-athletic. I'm very unathletic. I didn't play anything in college. I don't play anything now. I've never ran a marathon or anything. I don't really care at all about sports. I really don't. It doesn't interest me or really matter to me whatsoever. That being said, students really, really care about it. And teaching something that students care about is wonderful.
That's great. Catherine Sanderson, you're a master teacher, you're a terrific mentor, you're a guide for us all and an inspiration, and clearly not a sports enthusiast.
Not a sports enthusiast. Yes.
Thank you for being here on Between Two Minutes.
Thanks for the invitation to talk.